Okay, so on your screen, you have the 5 parts of the bureaucracy. We're going to work through each of these. I'll explain like how a person gets to be a part of one of these. There is no way that you're going to remember all of them, like every agency. So here's what I'm going to suggest. As we go through, you need to have like 2 or 3 examples of each. So you should know a couple of cabinet agencies. You should know a couple like 1 or 2, probably just 1 executive agency, regulatory, a few, government corporations, a few, so that if you were ever asked to write about them, you'd have something in your back pocket. I'll talk about the ones that are most common. Those are the ones they probably ask you multiple choice questions about. But nobody, except somebody that studies this for a lot, knows all the parts of the bureaucracy, like every agency that's there. Plus they change. Okay, this is a very fluid concept. Real quickly, I want to just kind of draw you a diagram so you can see the flow of how the bureaucracy works. Maybe? Okay, so when we talk about the executive branch, ultimately, obviously, the president is in charge, right? Like, so he ultimately makes every decision that happens within the executive branch. You have 3 parts, okay? You have what's called the EOP, the Executive Office of the Presidency. Whoops. You have the cabinet, which is what we'll talk about first because it's the oldest part. And then you have 3 different kinds of things that are independent. And we'll explain what those are in a minute. You can have executive agencies. You have some that are regulatory independent agencies. And then you have some that actually function like businesses. And they're called government corporations. Okay? There's a lot of overlap in terms of policy, but there's like all these different parts. And so we're, like I said, we're going to work through and understand what each of these are, and then you just want to have a couple of examples of each of them.
What's the IND?
Independent.
And what's to the left?
EOP. But I'm going to work you through each part of it, okay?
EOP is the executive office.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's start with the cabinet first. Probably a lot of you guys have heard of the cabinet. Sometimes we refer to that as departments. If you have ever heard somebody referred to as a Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Interior, that means those are the people that run these various departments. Okay? How does one get to be Secretary of State? President appoints them, and what part of Congress? The Senate. So the President appoints the heads of all of these. The Senate has to confirm them. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, anything you want. Yeah. It's on my website too. But yeah, go right ahead. Okay, so this is the order in which they've been created. You can kind of see like there's a little bit of a correlation to when we started caring about those things. So from the very beginning, Washington created these 3. Department of State was going to handle foreign policy. Treasury was obviously economic policy. And then Department of Defense was going to be military. But then you can go on and you can see, like, okay, Department of the Interior is going to handle environmental policy and national parks. Well, that correlates to Teddy Roosevelt, you know, and the creation of all that kind of policy. Or housing and urban development is during the Civil Rights Movement, where we said we need to, like, integrate and make sure that, like, certain standards are met in, like, all of these different areas. Or Homeland Security is obviously following 9/11. It takes an act of Congress to create a cabinet. Ultimately, these people do report to the president for sure, but there's a lot of ways that they have to report to Congress. There's different things that Congress can do to try to have oversight, you know, and ask them to come in, and they have to like testify and that sort of thing. Basically, the job of a secretary or the job of the attorney general, who's in charge of the Department of Justice, is like a department manager. So think about, again, those of you that have jobs, and you have like a big store manager or like wherever it is you work, and then you maybe have shift managers, or you have like different parts of where you work, where you've got people that manage like different aspects. Your job as a department manager or as a secretary, like it's just to oversee that area. So John Kerry is our current Secretary of State. His sole responsibility is to advise the president over foreign policy. So he doesn't get involved in environmental policy. He doesn't get involved in labor policy. Like, he gets really focused on his one thing. And his job is to represent the president in terms of foreign policy, to like meet with other people from other countries. But it's also to advise the president and say, this is what I think you should do. This is like what matters to you. How influential your cabinet is just depends on the president. Like some of them really give them a lot of power, and some are super dismissive and they don't really let them do anything. I think the thing that you have to know about the cabinet, though, is that their focus is very kind of like singular. Okay, so to kind of give you an analogy, like if you think about our school, and you put Mr. Spain up here as the president, as the CEO, and then you take all the different departments that exist in this school, whenever we have a meeting, and like he has the different department heads come in, and he wants to know my opinion about something, then I'm going to say, well, from a social studies perspective, this is what I think. Because I don't teach math, you know, and I don't teach foreign language, nor do I really think about like what their perspective is. Not that I don't care, but I can't speak to that. So like my focus could be very, very singular, so I don't always get to influence those decisions. Like I don't get to be a part of every decision that's made in the school, because if there's no relevance to me, then he's not going to ask me. He's not going to include me in that part of it. For those of you that watched the video about the modern presidency that I asked you to watch at home, remember there were 3 clips. The last clip, Secretary of Labor, it was the really short guy. That's how people always remember it. He talked a lot. He was the Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, and he talked a lot about how it was really hard for him sometimes to get the president to listen to him. Not because they didn't have a good relationship, but because the president has so many things going on that he's not always thinking specifically about labor policy. So when Secretary Reich wanted to accomplish something, sometimes he actually had to go around the president a little bit. Not in a contradictory way, but he had to work to kind of build support in other places so that he could get the president's eye and catch the president's attention. Okay? All right. The next part then are just independent agencies. Really the best example I have of this is NASA. Independent agencies are, a lot of times they're things that are not very political. You know, maybe they are, this is the independent executive agencies, the first one that I said. They are, maybe what they do is like super unique, and they just deserve to be their own, because you don't want them shadowed under a cabinet. All of those cabinets have like lots of different agencies that fall underneath them, and what they're saying is that this independent agency, we don't want them to be mired up in the politics of the cabinet. We want them just to exist to do their special, unique thing. They tend to not be, like I said, like as political as the other parts. The president does have some influence there. They do have to report to the president, and they do have a relationship with them, so they're not completely removed from politics. But they're just like, I don't know, they're just their own thing, and they deserve to be there.
I like the government responsibility.
Say it again?
The government still gives them money, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because, I mean, the government, they're part of the government. Absolutely. Then you have regulatory agencies. This is the one that I think you really need to focus on, because regulatory agencies have a huge, huge opportunity to influence policy. These are the ones that they're most likely to ask you about on an exam. I'm most likely to ask you about on an exam, because their ability as bureaucrats to influence policy is significantly higher than some of the other places. So regulatory agencies are things that are, independent regulatory agencies are created by Congress, but they are very removed from the presidency and from the Congress on purpose, because they have the ability to kind of behave like police officers. Like, their law enforcement power is not simply execution of law, but it's like the ability to like assess wrongdoing or assess fines. So for example, the Federal Communications Commission, you guys have all heard about them because like we have mess ups on TV, you know, like people like say different things. So there was a case a couple years ago where Bono, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said some kind of explicative on a award. Maybe it was on the Academy Awards, I think, or something. Anyway, so he said something that the FCC has in their forbidden list of words on live television. And so the FCC fined him, and they fined whatever the television station was that had aired it, because they have the ability to do that. They can say, look, what you did was a violation. Or they could let it go. Like, it's up to them. Just like a police officer can give you a speeding ticket or not give you a speeding ticket, the FCC can decide that. Sometimes the rules are also written kind of vague. Like, if you look at the Clean Air Act, it's not, in all areas, it's not super specific. So then the EPA, which is another regulatory agency, has an opportunity to decide this is how we're going to enforce it. So why do you think we would want regulatory agencies to be more independent than the other parts of our government.
Because what if we don't want politics to get involved and then like the Republicans or the Democrats, then we have like a red FCA or...
Yeah, that's perfect. You don't want the president or the Congress to be able to use these as a weapon against people. You know, I mean, you want them to legitimately be able to say that they're 100% removed from partisanship, because the president still appoints the heads of these agencies. The Senate still has to confirm them. The Federal Reserve goes here. So remember we learned about the Federal Reserve in the last unit. I said the EPA, the Securities and Exchange Commission that oversees the stock market and regulates them. So there is some level of politics involved, but it is far more independent than like what would happen in the cabinets. All right, got some examples? All right, now we've got government corporations. Government corporations are literally businesses that the government owns. The major difference is going to be in terms of like private business is that if they want to do stuff, a lot of times they need government permission, specifically they need Congress. So the post office would be an example. The post office is owned by the government. They have a monopoly on mail delivery. They're trying to make money, but like they can't just, like UPS, if they're growing, they can build a new UPS store. They can hire more employees. The post office literally needs an act of Congress to do that stuff. Like the reason we have so few post offices in Frisco is because Congress won't give us any more post offices in Frisco. And so like the post office and like postal workers, I've heard this is like the worst place. Like nobody wants to work here because they're so overworked because we don't have enough infrastructure to support their job.
Why wouldn't they just make a new one? Like why would
cost. I was talking to this, I was actually in line at the post office one day and I was talking to this old lady in front of me, and there was like a committee years ago that tried to like lobby Congress to get more, and they said that they've really gotten burned because they've put post offices in places that were booming and then like the population shrank, and I guess they don't want to close them. I don't know.
Wait, so we only have this one and the other one's
I only know of this, like the one that's on Rollator, like just like kind of across from Starbucks and all that.
well,
This is like their like a sorting, yeah, like a station. Like you can't actually go there and get mail.
Oh.
I don't know. Is there one on the west side? I don't even.
No, there's one across Preston, like you just go down the street.
Right. That's the only one I know. Which is crazy, right? For our population, we need more. If they want to raise their prices, like on stamps, they need congressional approval. So it's a little bit different. So it's harder for them to be as efficient. So examples would be Amtrak. I don't know if you guys have ever ridden on Amtrak before. Do you know what Amtrak is?
It's a rail service.
Yeah. It's like a train. And if you go on the Amtrak website and you're like, oh, I think I want to take a train to Austin or I want to go to Chicago. I mean, it doesn't look like government. I mean, it just looks like you're buying a plane ticket, you know, or a bus ticket. It's just a train.
I think there's a station that was like down in Mesquite or something.
I've heard it's kind of fun. I mean, I don't know. I've never done it, but anyway. Okay, so that's government corporation. All right, here's the last part. The last part is called the Executive Office of the Presidency, or the EOP. Okay, so the difference here is the EOP is not influenced by Congress. They're not accountable. They're accountable to Congress in the sense that Congress has oversight of the entire executive branch, but the Senate doesn't have to confirm anybody here. The president can make this whatever he wants it to be. So this is literally, like these are the president's closest advisors. So the president has a National Security Council. Traditionally, there are certain positions in our government that serve in the National Security Council, but if a president wants to create something new or they want to make that different, they 100% can. It's totally up to them. The Office of Management and Budget, when did we talk about them before? Yeah, absolutely, and they're the ones that write the president's budget, right? But if you remember, I told you, their job, I said, is to serve the president, to write a budget that reflects what the president wants.